So, most places in the world are really well documented and have hundreds, if not thousands, of years of history. But there are places that have barely any history at all. And the place I wanted to look at today is called Ushakov Island, way up here at almost 81 degrees north. How was this place even discovered? What goes on there? It starts all the way back in 1912 with the Brusilov Expedition. This happened on the boat, the St. Anna, and they wanted to find a new passageway to get from the Atlantic Ocean over here through the Pacific Ocean. The problem was that this area above the Soviet Union at the time was very full of ice. The seas are really dangerous. It's not easy to get through this area, but they wanted to see anyway. So they took off from around this area and they came over here to the Yamal Peninsula. The problem was that they left really late in the year and they pretty quickly got stuck in ice around here. For 2 years, they drifted through the waters pretty helplessly and slowly started making it more north without seeing any land for a long time. Eventually, conditions got really bad. They started developing scurvy. Things were just brutal. So, around the Franz Josef lands, they decided to abandon ship. Two people did end up surviving and walked really far down. I'm going to do another video where I explain that expedition a little more, but basically, it wasn't very good for the people on it. And the documents from that expedition did make it down to scholars at the time in this area. One of these was named Vladimir Vize, and he studied the map of the drift. So this is around where they got stuck, and they just kept floating through this area. He concluded, based on seeing this and other observations, that there had to be some sort of island around this area affecting the drift patterns. So only a few years later, in 1930, Professor Wiese and his crew decided to go up and look for this island, and they actually found it. They found this island right here, which they later named Vize Island after him. 5 years later, in 1935, the icebreaker Sadko also came up to this area, captained by Ushakov. And he saw that there was a lot of icebergs floating towards him when he was around this area. And he concluded that there had to be some island producing these icebergs that were coming towards him all the time. So he took his icebreaker up to this area and was the first one to discover this place in 1935. When he discovered it, it wasn't a nice, luscious island full of palm trees and coconuts. In fact, this place was just covered in an ice cap. There's no shoreline on this island. It's 20-meter cliffs of just pure ice. There's not really any exposed rock or ground. And there's polar bears, walruses, seals, and no plant life. So, not a great place to go hang out. In 1954, the Soviet Union decided to put up a polar station up here. And this was common around that time. They're putting polar stations all over these islands. Ushakov Island was no exception. As far as I can tell, on the polar station, around 4 people worked at a time, usually a chief, a mechanic, the radio operator, and the meteorologist. And they all hung out here, but had to constantly defend themselves from polar bears and survive brutal winters of negative 30 degrees. Although the summers aren't terrible, they actually do get above freezing. Anyways, in the 1980s, there was a lot of stuff happening in the Soviet Union, and this polar station was vacated. After that point, this island was pretty much forgotten about by most people, except in 2001, a Lost Islands expedition came up here to set up radio equipment. Now, I've seen a lot of YouTube videos and articles about teams that set up radio equipments on certain remote islands, like Bouvet Island in my last video. I don't really understand what they're doing. So if someone in the comments wants to explain like what the lore is behind a lot of those radio expeditions, I'd be very appreciative. Anyways, when that expedition found that polar station, it was not in the same situation that it was before. It only had 2 of the buildings above ice, and the people on that expedition had to constantly defend themselves from polar bears, and it was just overall not a fun place to be, so they left pretty shortly after getting there. Now, the polar station was only built 800 meters or half a mile from the edge of the island, and in the early 2000s, ice was coming off of the island at faster and faster rates. And in 2018, a chunk of ice that had the buildings on it also came off, brought the buildings with it. So, as far as I can tell, the polar station is no longer there. This island is infrequently visited by people and ships coming around it and looking at it. There's some really cool videos on YouTube of people looking at Ushakov Island from the outside. A lot of walruses and seals that you can see that are just chilling on the ice chunks, so it's kind of fun to watch. But other than that, there's very little information on this place on the internet. So, do you think anything else goes on here? And have you heard of this place before? If you like this video, you'll probably like this video in the bottom left. Thanks for watching.